The gunshot cracked through the autumn air as Naomi Dawson clutched her stomach, not from the bullet that had narrowly missed her, but from the precious life growing within her womb, a life her father had just tried to end. It was 1885 in Enid, Oklahoma Territory, and at 20 years old, Naomi found herself running for her life across the dusty Main Street, her cotton dress stained with tears and the fine red dirt that characterized the newly opened settlement lands. "Don't you ever come back, you disgraceful harlot." Samuel Dawson's voice boomed from the porch of their family home, the Presbyterian minister's righteous fury carrying across the stunned onlookers who had frozen at the sound of gunfire. "You're dead to us now." Naomi stumbled forward, her slender frame shaking as she pushed through the small crowd that had gathered. Her long auburn hair, usually neatly pinned, fell in tangled waves around her tear-streaked face. 6 months pregnant and nowhere to go, she felt the ground beneath her feet giving way to despair. "Folks, clear out. Nothing to see here." The town marshal called but made no move to pursue the distraught young woman or confront the respected minister. Naomi knew she couldn't stay in Enid. Her father's influence reached too far, and the whispers had already started. Unwed, and carrying a child in a territory where reputation was sometimes the only currency people had, she was ruined. The father of her baby, a traveling salesman who had promised marriage before disappearing with the spring cattle drives, had left her to face the consequences alone. She walked blindly toward the edge of town, her small carpet bag containing the few possessions she'd managed to grab in the chaos of her banishment. The sun beat down mercilessly as she reached the crossroads, unsure which direction held the least peril for a woman in her condition. "Miss, you need some help there," a deep voice called from behind her. Naomi turned, instinctively covering her protruding belly with her arms. A tall man sat astride a dappled gray horse, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. The badge on his weathered leather vest identified him as part of a cattle outfit, not a town official who might send her back to her father. "I'm fine, sir," she managed, though her voice cracked with the obvious lie. The cowboy dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who spent more time in a saddle than on foot. As he approached, she saw he wasn't much older than her own 20 years, perhaps 25 at most. His face was tanned from long days under the sun, but his eyes were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. "No disrespect intended, but you don't look fine," he said gently. "And that road leads nowhere a lady should be walking alone, especially." His eyes flicked briefly to her condition. Naomi felt fresh tears threatening. "I have nowhere else to go. My father has cast me out." Understanding dawned in the young cowboy's eyes. He'd seen such things before the harsh judgment of frontier towns that could be both deeply religious and unforgiving. He removed his hat, revealing dark blonde hair that curled slightly at his neck. "Name's Quinn Norwood, madam. I ride for the Double Cross Ranch about 15 miles west of here." He gestured to the brand on his horse's flank. "Where were you planning to go?" "I don't know," Naomi admitted, the fight draining from her. "Somewhere my father won't find me. Somewhere I can have this baby in peace." Quinn looked back toward town, his jaw tightening as he pieced together what must have happened. The gunshot he'd heard while picking up supplies suddenly made terrible sense. "That baby deserves a safe home," he said firmly, his voice low but resolute. "And so do you, miss." "Dawson," she supplied, then hesitated. "Naomi Dawson, though I suppose that name won't serve me well around here anymore." Quinn nodded thoughtfully. "Miss Naomi, I can't leave you out here. The ranch where I work has a cookhouse with a spare room. The cook, Mrs. Abernathy, is a good woman who could use some help. It's honest work, and no one there will judge you." He paused, clearly measuring his next words. "It's not charity I'm offering, but a chance." Naomi studied the stranger before her. Everything she'd been taught warned against trusting a man she'd just met, but what choice did she have? The alternative was the open road with winter approaching, or worse, one of the houses of ill repute that dotted the territory where desperate women often ended up. "Why would you help me?" she asked, needing to understand his motives. Quinn's expression softened. "My sister found herself in similar circumstances years back. Nobody helped her." He didn't elaborate further, but the pain in his eyes told Naomi enough. "The ranch is a good place, hard work but fair people." The baby kicked then, as if offering its own opinion on the matter. Naomi placed a hand on her belly, making her decision. "I accept your offer, Mr. Norwood. Thank you." Quinn nodded once, replaced his hat, and led his horse closer. "Let me help you up first, then I'll walk alongside. It's not too far to where my wagon's hitched." With surprising gentleness for his large hands, Quinn helped Naomi onto the horse, adjusting his saddle blanket to make her more comfortable. As they made their way toward the livery stable where he'd left his supply wagon, Naomi felt the stares of townspeople following them. She kept her eyes forward, ignoring the whispers. "That's the minister's daughter," someone murmured as they passed. "Shame on her, parading around in her condition," another voice added. Quinn's jaw tightened, but he said nothing until they reached the wagon. He helped Naomi down and settled her on the wagon bench before securing his horse to the back. "Don't mind them," he said quietly as he climbed up beside her. "Most folks are just one mistake away from standing where you are, but they're too afraid to admit it." As the wagon pulled away from Enid, Naomi watched the town recede into the distance. The church steeple where her father preached every Sunday about compassion and forgiveness stood as a final irony against the pink-streaked sky. She didn't know what awaited her at the Double Cross Ranch, but it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. The journey to the ranch took nearly 3 hours, much of it in silence. Quinn wasn't a talkative man, but occasionally he pointed out landmarks or shared brief stories about the territory. Naomi learned he'd been working cattle since he was 16, that he'd fought briefly in the last years of the war, though he rarely spoke of it, and that he'd been with the Double Cross for 4 years now. "The owner, Mr. Harrison, is fair but expects honest work," Quinn explained as they crested a rise that revealed a sprawling ranch in the valley below. His wife passed some years back, but he raised 3 sons who help run the place. The youngest, Ethan, is about your age and manages the breeding stock. Naomi nodded, taking in the information while studying the ranch. It was larger than she'd imagined, with a main house, bunkhouse, barn, and several outbuildings, including what must be the cookhouse Quinn had mentioned. A corral held several horses, and in the distance she could make out cattle grazing on the autumn brown grass. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Quinn glanced at her, a hint of smile touching his lips. "It grows on you." As they approached the ranch yard, several cowboys looked up from their evening chores. Naomi felt their curious gazes and instinctively drew her shawl tighter around herself. "Quinn." "Didn't expect you back till tomorrow," called an older man with a silvered beard, walking from the direction of the barn. "Made good time, Mr. Harrison," Quinn replied, pulling the wagon to a stop. "Found someone who needs work in town. This is Miss Naomi. She's handy with cooking and such." Thought Mrs. Abernathy might appreciate the help. Thomas Harrison studied Naomi with shrewd but not unkind eyes, immediately noting her condition. Unlike the townsfolk, however, his expression showed no judgment. "Mrs. Abernathy has been saying she needs an extra pair of hands," he said simply. "You're welcome here, Miss Naomi, as long as you pull your weight where you're able." "I will, sir." "Thank you," Naomi replied, relief flooding through her. Quinn helped her down from the wagon and collected her small bag. "I'll take you to the cookhouse. Mrs. Abernathy will get you settled." As they walked across the yard, Naomi was acutely aware of the stares from the cowhands, though they quickly returned to their work when Quinn's gaze swept over them. The cookhouse was a long, low building with a chimney that released the promising aroma of beef stew and fresh bread. Inside, they found a stout woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, her capable hands deep in a mass of bread dough. She looked up at their entrance, her eyebrows rising at the sight of Naomi. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Naomi," Quinn said. "She needs work and a safe place. I told her you might need help in the kitchen." The older woman wiped her hands on her apron and approached, her eyes sharp but not unkind as they took in Naomi's condition. "How far along?" she asked directly. "About 6 months, madam," Naomi answered. Mrs. Abernathy nodded. "Can you cook?" "Yes, madam, and sew and clean. I kept house for my father after my mother passed." "Your father know where you are?" Naomi hesitated, glancing at Quinn. "Her father's the reason she needs somewhere safe," Quinn said quietly, understanding passed across Mrs. Abernathy's weathered face. She'd seen enough of life to fill in the blanks. "Well, I've got a room off the back. Small, but it's private. You can help with breakfast and supper and mending in between." She gestured toward Naomi's belly. "When your time comes, we'll manage. I've delivered my share of babies in my day." The kindness, so unexpected after the day's events, nearly undid Naomi. "Thank you," she whispered. Mrs. Abernathy nodded briskly. "Quinn, go unload those supplies while I show her where she'll stay, and tell the boys supper's in 30 minutes. After Quinn left, Mrs. Abernathy led Naomi through the kitchen to a small room at the back of the cookhouse. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window that looked out toward the distant hills. "It's not much, but it's yours while you're here," the older woman said. "Get yourself settled. You can start helping tomorrow morning. Breakfast is at 5 for the hands." Left alone, Naomi sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to exhale. She placed her hands on her swollen abdomen, feeling the gentle movements of her child. "We'll be all right," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. At least they were safe for now, and that would have to be enough. The first weeks at the Double Cross Ranch passed in a blur of activity. Naomi rose before dawn each day to help Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast for the hungry cowhands. She learned quickly, her nimble hands adapting to the older woman's methods. Between meals, she mended clothes, cleaned the cookhouse, and gradually took on more responsibilities as Mrs. Abernathy came to trust her abilities. The ranch hands were respectful, if curious. Some avoided looking directly at her growing belly, while others offered awkward kindness, a nod of thanks for an extra biscuit, or a small trinket carved during evening watches. Thomas Harrison treated her with the same gruff fairness he showed all his workers, neither calling attention to her condition nor making allowances for it beyond what was reasonable. Quinn Norwood, however, remained something of a mystery. He was often away with the cattle, but when at the ranch, he made a point to check on her, bringing firewood for the cookhouse or stopping by with small gifts, wild honey from a hive he'd found, or particularly fine feathers he thought she might use for something. He never mentioned her circumstances or asked about the baby's father, for which Naomi was grateful. As November settled over the territory, bringing shorter days and bitter winds, Naomi's child grew more active. She often found herself pausing in her work, one hand pressed against her side where a tiny foot or elbow protruded. "Strong little one you've got there," Mrs. Abernathy commented one evening as they cleaned up after supper. The older woman had warmed considerably toward Naomi over the weeks, impressed by her work ethic and quiet dignity. "Yes," Naomi agreed with a small smile. "Always seems most active when I'm trying to rest." Mrs. Abernathy chuckled. "That's how they start training you for what's to come." She hesitated, then asked gently, "Have you thought about names?" Naomi folded a dish towel carefully. "If it's a girl, I thought perhaps Elizabeth after my mother for a boy." She trailed off. She hadn't allowed herself to think too far ahead. "You've time yet," Mrs. Abernathy said kindly. "Though not as much as you might think. Babies come when they're ready, not when we're expecting them." The door to the cookhouse opened then, bringing a gust of cold air, and Quinn Norwood, his coat dusted with the season's first snowflakes. He removed his hat, revealing wind-tousled hair, and nodded to both women. "Evening, ladies. Any chance there's coffee still hot?" "There is," Mrs. Abernathy answered, already moving to pour him a cup. "And some apple pie if you've a mind for it." "Wouldn't turn it down," he said with a rare smile that transformed his usually serious face. As Mrs. Abernathy cut a generous slice of pie, Quinn's eyes met Naomi's across the room. "How are you faring, Miss Naomi?" "Well enough," she replied. "Though your Oklahoma winters are colder than I expected." "This isn't even winter yet," Quinn said, accepting the coffee and pie with thanks. "Just wait till January." Mrs. Abernathy glanced between them and made a show of yawning. "Well, I'm for bed." "Naomi, make sure everything's locked up before you turn in." With that transparent excuse, she retreated to her quarters adjacent to the kitchen, leaving the two alone. Naomi busied herself wiping down the already clean tables, acutely aware of Quinn watching her as he ate his pie. "You've settled in well," he observed after a while. "The men say Mrs. Abernathy's cooking has improved since you arrived." Naomi felt a flush of pride. "She's taught me a great deal. I'm grateful for the chance to be useful." Quinn nodded, finishing his coffee. "Any word from town?" he asked carefully. "No," Naomi said, her voice tight. "I don't expect any." Quinn was silent for a moment. "I'll be riding to Enid tomorrow for supplies. Is there anything you need?" Naomi hesitated. "Some fabric, perhaps, for the baby, and thread." She had been saving her small wages for such necessities, knowing her time was drawing closer. "Consider it done," Quinn said, rising from the table and bringing his dishes to the wash basin despite her protests. "And Naomi." "Yes." "If there's ever trouble from town from your family, you should know that everyone here stands with you now. You're not alone anymore." The simple declaration, delivered in his straightforward way, struck Naomi deeply. She had been so focused on surviving day to day that she hadn't allowed herself to feel the profound isolation of her situation until that moment when he offered relief from it. "Thank you, Quinn," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded once, replacing his hat. "Good night, Naomi. Don't stay up too late." After he left, Naomi moved to the window, watching his tall figure cross the yard toward the bunkhouse, snow swirling in the lantern light around him. For the first time since leaving Enid, she felt something beyond gratitude toward the quiet cowboy, something that made her heart beat a little faster, despite all the sensible reasons it shouldn't. Quinn's journey to Enid the next day proved more eventful than anticipated. The town had grown considerably since the land run of '89, with new businesses springing up and more settlers arriving each month. He conducted his usual business efficiently, purchasing supplies for the ranch and the specific items Naomi had requested, including several yards of soft flannel and cotton for baby clothes. As he was loading his purchases into the wagon, a commotion from the direction of the church caught his attention. A crowd had gathered, and at its center stood a tall, austere man Quinn recognized immediately from Naomi's description as Reverend Samuel Dawson. The minister was addressing the crowd with fire and brimstone rhetoric about moral decay and God's judgment. Quinn secured his goods and walked closer, keeping to the edge of the gathering. What he heard made his blood run cold. "And so I say to you, good people of Enid," Reverend Dawson thundered, "we must purify our community of sin's taint. The fallen women who corrupt our young men, the gamblers and drunkards who lead them astray, all must face God's judgment, and ours." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Quinn noticed several men wearing makeshift badges of vigilance committee forming under the Reverend's guidance. Their self-righteous zeal reminded Quinn too much of the groups that had hanged men without trial during the war years. "Beginning tonight," the Reverend continued, "we ride to cleanse our territory of wickedness. We start with those ranches harboring fugitives from justice and morality." Quinn had heard enough. He returned to his wagon and hastily finished his business in town, gathering additional ammunition and supplies that hadn't been on his original list. As he prepared to leave, a voice called his name. "Norwood, hold up there." Quinn turned to see Marshal Jenkins approaching, his expression troubled. "Marshal," Quinn acknowledged with a nod. "Heard you took in the Dawson girl some weeks back," Jenkins said without preamble. Quinn's face remained impassive. "The Double Cross hired a cook's helper." "Don't recall her surname." Jenkins wasn't fooled. "Her father's stirring up trouble. Got half the town convinced she was kidnapped by ranch hands after he mercifully offered to forgive her indiscretion." "That's so." Quinn's voice was dangerously calm. "It's a damn lie and we both know it," Jenkins said quietly. "I saw him take that shot at her, but the Reverend's got influence and folks are riled up about ranch trash stealing their women." He glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "They're forming a posse, Norwood. Claim they're after rustlers, but that's not all they're hunting." Quinn's jaw tightened. "Appreciate the warning, Marshal," Jenkins nodded. "I've got no jurisdiction outside town limits, but I'll do what I can to slow them down. You ride fast and warn Harrison." Quinn wasted no time. He pushed his team harder than he normally would, making the return journey in record time despite the deteriorating weather. By the time he reached the Double Cross, the early winter darkness had fallen, and snow was coming down heavily. He drove directly to the main house rather than the barn, relief flooding through him when he saw lights still burning. Thomas Harrison answered his urgent knock, immediately alert at Quinn's expression. "Trouble?" the ranch owner asked. "Yes, sir." Vigilance committee forming in town, led by Reverend Dawson. "They're using rustling as an excuse, but they're really after Naomi." Harrison's weathered face hardened. "Get the men together in the bunkhouse. I'll join you shortly." Within 30 minutes, all 15 ranch hands were assembled. Quinn had just finished explaining the situation when Harrison entered, carrying his old Army rifle. "Some of you know the Dawson girl's story, some don't," Harrison said without preamble. "Doesn't matter. She's under our protection now, same as anyone who works this ranch. We've had no trouble with rustlers, so any claim otherwise is horseshit." He looked around the room, his gaze landing on each man in turn. "No one's obligated to stand with us if trouble comes. Anyone who wants to ride out now can do so with no hard feelings." Not a single man moved. "Good," Harrison nodded. "Quinn, take 2 men and move the north herd deeper into our range. Ethan, you and 3 others secure the horses in the lower paddock. James, you and Roberts take watch at the road. Rest of you, check your weapons and prepare for a long night." As the men dispersed to their tasks, Harrison turned to Quinn. "Better warn Naomi. She should know what's coming." Quinn found Naomi in the cookhouse, sewing by lamplight while Mrs. Abernathy kneaded dough for the next day's bread. Both women looked up at his entrance, immediately sensing his tension. "What's happened?" Mrs. Abernathy asked sharply. Quinn explained the situation as gently as possible, watching Naomi's face pale as he described her father's actions. "I'm so sorry," she whispered when he finished. "I've brought this trouble to your door." "This isn't your doing," Quinn said firmly. "Your father's using God as a cover for his pride and cruelty." Mrs. Abernathy snorted in agreement. "Men like that give true faith a bad name." She turned to Naomi. "Don't you worry, child. This ranch has weathered worse than some town preacher with delusions of grandeur." Despite their reassurances, Naomi was clearly distraught. "Perhaps I should go meet them on the road and explain—" "No," Quinn cut her off, more sharply than he intended. More gently, he added, "That's exactly what we're not going to do. You and the baby stay safe here." The mention of her child seemed to strengthen Naomi's resolve. She straightened, one hand protectively covering her belly. "What can I do to help?" "Keep to the cookhouse," Quinn instructed. "Mrs. Abernathy, there's a rifle above the door frame. Do you know how to use it?" The older woman gave him a withering look. "Been shooting longer than you've been alive, boy." That drew a small smile from Quinn. "Yes, madam. If anyone but ranch hands approaches, fire a warning shot." As Quinn turned to leave, Naomi caught his arm. "Quinn, thank you for everything." Their eyes held for a long moment. "Nothing to thank me for yet," he said softly. "But I promise you, Naomi, no one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go, not while I'm breathing." The sincerity in his voice stirred something in Naomi, that she tried to ignore these past weeks, a growing affection for this quiet man, whose actions spoke far louder than his sparse words. The night stretched endlessly as the ranch prepared for potential conflict. Quinn rode with the men, moving cattle deeper into the ranch's property, returning hours later to find the main buildings secured and watchmen posted. The snowfall had intensified, which might deter the vigilantes, but also reduced visibility for the ranch's defenders. Near midnight, a signal came from the road, 3 short whistles indicating approaching riders. Quinn and Harrison moved to the front porch of the main house, rifles ready but not yet raised. Behind them, the other hands took positions at windows and along the porch rail. Through the swirling snow, a group of riders emerged, at least 20 men on horseback, led by a tall figure Quinn recognized as Reverend Dawson. They halted at the edge of the yard, just beyond easy shooting distance. "That's far enough," Harrison called out. "State your business on private property." "Thomas Harrison," Reverend Dawson's voice carried despite the wind. "I'm Reverend Samuel Dawson from Enid. We're pursuing rustlers believed to be hiding on your land." "No rustlers here," Harrison replied evenly. "Just honest cowhands and a ranch that's never had trouble with the law." "Then you won't object to us searching your property," Dawson called back. "We have reason to believe stolen cattle and other property have been brought here." The emphasis on other property made Quinn's hand tighten on his rifle. "I absolutely object," Harrison answered. "This is private land. You have no authority here, vigilance committee or not. If you have legitimate concerns about rustling, take them to the territorial marshal." One of the riders pushed forward beside Dawson. "We know you're harboring the Dawson girl against her will. Her father demands her return." Quinn stepped forward, unable to remain silent. "The lady came here of her own free will after her father tried to shoot her in broad daylight. She's employed here legally and stays by choice." Murmurs ran through the group of riders. Not all of them had known that part of the story, it seemed. "Lies," Reverend Dawson shouted. "My daughter was led astray and then kidnapped when I tried to bring her to repentance. The Lord commands me to reclaim her. The Lord commands charity and mercy," came a clear female voice from behind Quinn. He turned, heart sinking, to see Naomi standing in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl against the cold. Despite his instructions to stay hidden, she had come forward, her pregnant form unmistakable even in the dim light. "Naomi," her father called, his voice shifting to something almost gentle. "Come home, daughter. All is forgiven. We'll find a proper solution for your situation." Naomi stepped onto the porch, though Quinn moved protectively to her side. "I heard your solution when you fired that gun, father. There's nothing for me in your house but shame and hatred." "You ungrateful," Dawson began, his mask of compassion slipping. "I'm staying here," Naomi interrupted, her voice stronger than Quinn had ever heard it. "These people have shown me more Christian charity than you ever did. They've given me honest work and a safe place for my baby." "The child of sin," Dawson spat. "No child is born of sin," Naomi replied steadily. "Only of love or of circumstance. Mine will be born of both the circumstance you condemn and the love of the community that has taken us in." Her words seemed to affect some of the riders, who shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. "Reverend," one of them said, "maybe we should leave this be if the girl's here willingly." "Silence," Dawson thundered. "She's bewitched by these sinners." He pointed dramatically at Quinn. "That man has corrupted her further. He's the father of her bastard." The accusation hung in the snowy air. Quinn felt Naomi tense beside him but kept his eyes on the mounted men. "That's a lie," he said calmly. "But what isn't a lie is that Miss Naomi and her child are under the protection of the Double Cross Ranch. Anyone who tries to take her against her will answer to all of us." As if to emphasize his point, the ranch hands stepped forward, weapons visible but not yet aimed. A tense silence followed, broken only by the wind and the nervous shifting of horses. Finally, one of the riders, an older man Quinn recognized as the town's general store owner, spoke up. "Reverend Dawson, I agreed to ride tonight to catch rustlers, not to force a grown woman to return to a father who shot at her. Whatever her circumstances, that's not Christian behavior." Several others murmured agreement, and Quinn could see the Vigilance Committee fracturing before his eyes. "Cowards," Dawson shouted as men began to turn their horses. "The Lord will judge you as he judges these sinners." "Perhaps he will," Harrison said steadily. "But not tonight and not through you. Ride out now, Reverend, while you still can." For a terrible moment, Quinn thought the preacher might order an attack despite his dwindling support. The man's face contorted with rage as he stared at his daughter. "You're dead to me," he finally hissed. "You and your bastard both." Naomi flinched but held her ground. "Then we'll live our lives in peace, father." With a final venomous glare, Dawson wrenched his horse around and galloped into the darkness, followed by only a handful of his most devoted followers. The majority of the riders tipped their hats apologetically to Harrison before turning back toward town. As the sounds of hoofbeats faded, the tension drained from the ranch yard. Harrison ordered the men to maintain watches through the night in case Dawson returned with reinforcements, but the immediate danger had passed. Quinn turned to Naomi, who stood trembling but upright in the falling snow. "You shouldn't have come out," he said, his voice rough with concern. "That was dangerous." "I couldn't hide while you all risked yourselves for me," she replied softly. "And I needed him to see that his power over me is gone." Quinn studied her face, marveling at the strength he saw there. "Are you all right?" "I will be," she answered. Her eyes met his, filled with something that made his heart stutter. "Thank you for standing with me." Before he could respond, she gasped suddenly, her hand flying to her stomach. "Naomi!" Alarm shot through him. "It's nothing," she assured him quickly. "Just the baby kicking very hard." "I think all the excitement stirred him up." Quinn couldn't help asking. A small smile touched Naomi's lips. "Or her," I don't know yet. Either way, Quinn said softly, that's one lucky child having you for a mother. The moment between them stretched, charged with unspoken feelings, until Mrs. Abernathy appeared at the door. Inside, both of you, she ordered. Before you catch your death in this snow, the drama's over for tonight. As they followed her inside, Quinn found himself hoping that the drama with Reverend Dawson truly was finished, but suspecting that a man like that rarely abandoned his righteous anger so easily. The weeks following the confrontation passed with surprising calm. December arrived with bitter cold but no further trouble from town. Occasional reports from cowboys who visited Enid suggested that Reverend Dawson had lost considerable standing after the failed raid, with many congregation members questioning his version of events. Life at the Double Cross settled into a winter routine. The cattle required constant attention in the harsh weather, keeping the men busy from dawn till dusk. Naomi's pregnancy advanced, her belly growing rounder as the baby prepared for its arrival. Mrs. Abernathy began setting aside extra linens and preparing the small back room for the birth, which she estimated would come shortly after the new year. Quinn found himself inventing reasons to visit the cookhouse between his duties. Sometimes he brought wood or water. Sometimes he offered to fix a loose floorboard or a sticky door. The real reason, which he barely admitted even to himself, was the warmth that filled him whenever Naomi smiled in greeting. One evening in mid-December, Quinn returned from a long day checking cattle in the north pasture to find the cookhouse unusually quiet. The evening meal had been served earlier, and most of the hands had already returned to the bunkhouse to escape the falling temperatures. Inside, he found Naomi alone, sitting by the stove with a piece of sewing in her hands, tiny garments for the coming baby. She looked up at his entrance, her face lighting with a smile that made the cold journey worthwhile. "Quinn, I saved you a plate." Mrs. Abernathy went to help Mrs. Harrison with some preserves at the main house. "Thank you," he said, removing his hat and coat before warming his hands by the stove. "How are you feeling today?" "Enormous," Naomi replied with a small laugh, setting aside her sewing to fetch his dinner. "And impatient." Mrs. Abernathy says first babies often come late, but I can't imagine getting any bigger. Quinn accepted the plate gratefully, noting how gracefully she moved despite her advanced condition. "You look." He hesitated, searching for the right word. Beautiful seemed too forward, though it was true. "Well," he finally finished lamely. Naomi gave him a curious look but didn't press. Instead, she resumed her seat and her sewing while he ate. "What are you making?" he asked between bites of the hearty stew. "A gown for the baby," she answered, holding up the small white garment. Mrs. Harrison sent over some of her son's baby clothes that she'd saved, but I wanted to make something myself as well. Quinn nodded, watching her nimble fingers work the needle through the soft fabric. "My mother used to say that every stitch sewn for a baby carried a prayer." Naomi looked up, surprised and pleased. "I've never heard that. It's lovely." She paused, then asked softly, "Do you ever think of them, your parents?" "Sometimes," Quinn admitted. "They've been gone a long while now. Fever took them both when I was 16. "I'm sorry," Naomi said, genuine compassion in her voice. "My mother died when I was 12. That's when Father became stricter." Quinn nodded, understanding much about her life in that simple statement. "You mentioned a sister once," Naomi said after a moment. "The one who was in circumstances like mine." Quinn's face tightened slightly. It wasn't something he spoke of often. "Yes, Rebecca. She was younger than me by 2 years. Naomi sensed his reluctance but gently pressed. "What happened to her?" Quinn set down his fork, meeting Naomi's eyes. "She fell in love with a soldier passing through our town. He promised to return and marry her once his enlistment ended. When she discovered she was expecting, our father threw her out. The parallels to Naomi's situation weren't lost on either of them. She went to a distant cousin in Kansas, Quinn continued, his voice growing more somber. I was away working cattle at the time. By the time I returned and learned what had happened, months had passed. I rode to find her, but he swallowed hard. The baby came early. There were complications. I arrived 2 days after they buried her. Oh, Quinn, Naomi whispered, tears filling her eyes. I'm so sorry. The baby, a little girl, survived, Quinn added. My cousin's family raised her as their own. She'd be about 10 now. I send money when I can, though they never asked for it. Naomi reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. That's why you helped me that day in Enid. Quinn turned his hand to clasp hers gently. I couldn't save Rebecca, but when I saw you standing there at the crossroads. He trailed off, unable to fully articulate the mixture of memory, compulsion, and something deeper that had driven him to stop. You did save me, Naomi said softly. And my baby. Their eyes held, the contact between their hands warming Quinn more thoroughly than the stove's heat. He found himself leaning forward slightly. Drawn by something in her gaze, the door opened with a blast of cold air as Mrs. Abernathy returned, breaking the moment. Quinn withdrew his hand and stood, thanking Naomi for the meal before bidding both women good night. Outside in the bitter cold, Quinn stood for a moment looking up at the star-filled sky. He was falling in love with Naomi Dawson, had been falling since that first day, if he were honest with himself. But her situation was complicated, her future uncertain, and the last thing she needed was another man making claims on her life. He resolved to keep his feelings to himself, at least until after the baby arrived and she had found her footing as a mother. What Quinn didn't see as he walked away was Naomi watching him from the window, her hand pressed to her heart, her own feelings just as confused and just as powerful. As Christmas approached, the ranch was blanketed in snow, transforming the rugged landscape into something from a fairy tale. Despite the harsh conditions, spirits were high at the Double Cross. Mrs. Harrison organized decorations for the main house, and even the cookhouse boasted evergreen boughs and red ribbons. On Christmas Eve, tradition dictated that all ranch employees from the lowliest stable boy to Harrison himself gathered in the main house for a special dinner and celebration. Mrs. Abernathy had been cooking for days, assisted by Naomi who, despite her now unwieldy figure, insisted on contributing to the festivities. You should rest, Mrs. Abernathy scolded as Naomi rolled out pastry for mince pies. That baby's sitting low, won't be long now. I'm fine, Naomi insisted, though in truth, she'd been experiencing occasional twinges since morning. Nothing regular or particularly painful, but enough to make her wonder if her time might be approaching sooner than expected. I want everything to be perfect. It's my first Christmas here. Mrs. Abernathy gave her a knowing look, but didn't argue further. By early evening, the celebration was in full swing. The Harrisons' dining room and parlor accommodated the entire ranch staff, with tables groaning under the weight of roast beef, turkey, and all the trimmings. A small cedar tree decorated with paper stars and candles stood in the corner, with modest gifts beneath it, mostly practical items like new gloves or knives, but wrapped festively nonetheless. Naomi sat near the fire, enjoying the warmth and the company. Several of the cowboys who had initially been awkward around her had warmed considerably over the past months, treating her with a brotherly protectiveness that touched her deeply. Quinn sat across the room, deep in conversation with Ethan Harrison, but his eyes frequently found hers, a silent check that she was comfortable. After dinner, Harrison stood to make his annual Christmas address, thanking the men for their hard work and loyalty. He raised his glass in a toast. To the double-cross family old members and new, may the coming year bring health, prosperity, and peace to all under our roof. Glasses were raised all around. As Naomi sipped her cider, another twinge, stronger than before, made her wince slightly. Mrs. Abernathy, ever observant, was at her side instantly. "How long have you been having pains?" she asked in a low voice. "Just since this morning," Naomi admitted, "but they're not regular." The older woman's eyes narrowed. "And now, more frequent in the last hour," Naomi conceded. "But surely it's too early. First babies take time, you said." "Sometimes they read the same books we do, sometimes they don't," Mrs. Abernathy replied dryly. "Let's get you back to the cookhouse just to be safe." Naomi reluctantly agreed, not wanting to disrupt the festivities. As they prepared to leave, Quinn noticed their whispered conversation and approached. "Everything all right?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. "Just tired," Naomi said quickly, not wanting to worry him. Mrs. Abernathy snorted. "The baby's deciding whether to be a Christmas gift." "We're going back to prepare, just in case." Quinn's eyes widened. "I'll come with you." "You'll do no such thing," Mrs. Abernathy said firmly. "This is women's work for now. Enjoy your evening. If we need help, we'll send word." Reluctantly, Quinn stepped back, his eyes fixed on Naomi's face. "If you need anything at all, I know where to find you," she finished with a small smile, touched by his concern. The two women made their way back to the cookhouse through the snowy yard, Mrs. Abernathy supporting Naomi, who paused once when another pain gripped her. "Definitely getting stronger," the older woman observed. "Let's get you comfortable and see what's what." Inside the cookhouse, Mrs. Abernathy helped Naomi change into a nightgown and settled her in the small back room they had prepared for this purpose. Fresh linens covered the bed, and a cradle that one of the hands had built stood ready in the corner. Over the next few hours, it became clear that Naomi's baby was indeed intent on a Christmas arrival. Her pains increased in frequency and intensity, though she bore them with remarkable composure. "You're doing well," Mrs. Abernathy encouraged as midnight approached. "Not long now, I think." A particularly strong contraction gripped Naomi, forcing a small cry from her lips. When it passed, she gasped, "Something's different." Mrs. Abernathy checked her quickly. "The baby's coming. Next pain, you'll need to push." Outside, snow had begun falling again, adding to the blanket already covering the ranch. In the bunkhouse, most of the hands had retired after the celebration, but Quinn remained awake, too anxious to sleep. When a knock came at the door shortly after midnight, he was on his feet instantly. One of the younger hands stood there, looking nervous. "Mrs. Abernathy sent for you, said to hurry but keep your head." Quinn didn't wait for more details. He grabbed his coat and hat, forcing himself not to run through the deep snow to the cookhouse. Inside, he found Mrs. Abernathy heating water at the stove. "How is she?" he demanded. "Nearly there," the older woman replied, surprisingly calm. "Baby's coming fast now. I need you to keep the fire going and bring fresh water when I call for it. And Quinn," she fixed him with a stern look, "no matter what you hear, stay in this room unless I call you." He nodded, understanding that some aspects of childbirth were not for men's witnessing. From the back room came the unmistakable sound of Naomi in pain, and it took every ounce of Quinn's self-control not to go to her. For the next hour, he maintained the fire, heated water, and paced the kitchen floor, flinching at every cry from the back room. Just as the mantel clock struck 1 in the morning Christmas Day, a different sound reached his ears. The thin, outraged wail of a newborn baby. Quinn froze, his heart hammering in his chest. The cry continued, strong and healthy as relief flooded through him. A few minutes later, Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the doorway, her face tired but triumphant. "You can come in now," she said. "Meet the newest resident of the Double Cross." Quinn removed his hat and followed her into the small room, his throat suddenly tight with emotion. Naomi lay propped against pillows, her face flushed and damp with perspiration but radiant with joy. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, lay a tiny red-faced infant. "Quinn," she said softly, looking up at him with tears of happiness in her eyes. "Meet my son, born on Christmas Day." Quinn moved closer, awestruck by the perfect tiny being who blinked up at the world with unfocused eyes. "He's beautiful," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like his mother." Naomi's eyes met his, a world of feeling passing between them. "Would you like to hold him?" Panic flashed through Quinn. I don't know how." "Nonsense," Mrs. Abernathy interrupted. "Sit down here and I'll show you." Before he could protest further, Quinn found himself seated beside the bed with the newborn carefully transferred to his arms. The baby weighed almost nothing, yet Quinn had never felt a more profound responsibility than in that moment, holding this new life that had already claimed a piece of his heart. "Support his head, that's right," Mrs. Abernathy instructed. "There you go." The baby squirmed slightly, then settled against Quinn's chest, one tiny hand escaping the blanket. Without thinking, Quinn offered his finger and the infant grasped it with surprising strength. "He likes you," Naomi said softly. Quinn looked up, finding her watching them with an expression that made his heart turn over in his chest. "What will you call him?" he asked. Naomi hesitated, then said, "I thought, Matthew Quinn Dawson, if that's all right with you." Emotion closed Quinn's throat. That she would honor him this way, linking him forever to this child who wasn't his by blood but had somehow become his in heart, overwhelmed him. "I'd be honored," he finally managed. Mrs. Abernathy, sensing the charged moment between them, made herself scarce. Muttering about checking on the fire when they were alone, Quinn gently returned the baby to Naomi's arms. "Naomi, he began, then faltered, unsure how to express the feelings that had been growing in him these past months. "Yes," she encouraged, her eyes never leaving his. "I know this isn't the right time," he continued carefully. "You've just been through so much and you need time with your son, but I want you to know that he took a deep breath. I care for you deeply, more than I thought possible." Naomi's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Oh, Quinn, you don't need to say anything," he hurried on. "I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that whatever you decide for your future, whether it's staying here or making a life somewhere else, I'll support you. And if someday, when you're ready, if you could see your way to considering." He trailed off, frustrated by his inability to find the right words. Naomi reached for his hand. "Quinn Norwood, are you trying to court me?" A smile tugged at his lips. "Doing a poor job of it, apparently." "On the contrary," she said softly. "I think you've been courting me since the day you found me at that crossroads, not with words or grand gestures, but with kindness and respect and quiet strength." Hope bloomed in Quinn's chest. And I've fallen in love with you," Naomi admitted simply. "I tried not to. I told myself it was gratitude or that I was vulnerable and confused, but it's more than that. It's real and true and it terrifies me." "Why?" he asked gently. "Because I've made such mistakes before. Because I have this little one to think of now. Because I'm afraid to trust my heart again." Quinn nodded, understanding completely. "I'm not asking for promises, Naomi. Just a chance when you're ready. We have time." The baby stirred between them, making small, smacking noises with his lips. Naomi adjusted her nightgown to feed him, and Quinn respectfully averted his eyes. "You don't have to leave," she said softly. "This is part of who I am now." Quinn settled back in the chair, watching with wonder as Naomi nursed her son. The intimacy of the moment, the trust she placed in him, felt like a sacred gift. "Quinn," she said after a while. "Yes, Merry Christmas." He smiled, his heart fuller than he could remember it being in years. "Merry Christmas, Naomi, and welcome to the world, Matthew Quinn Dawson." Outside, the snow continued to fall, wrapping the ranch in a blanket of pristine white, a new beginning for the new life that had just entered the world, and for the two adults who found themselves embarking on an unexpected journey together. The first months of 1886 passed in a blur of adjustments and quiet joy. Baby Matthew thrived under the doting attention of not just his mother, but the entire ranch. Mrs. Abernathy appointed herself honorary grandmother, while the Cowboys competed for the infant's smiles and took pride in each milestone, as if he were their collective achievement. Quinn continued his duties as Harrison's foreman, but spent every spare moment with Naomi and Matthew. True to his word, he courted her with patience and respect, understanding that she needed time to adjust to motherhood before considering a deeper relationship. By April, the harsh winter had given way to a vibrant spring. Calving season kept the ranch hands busy from dawn till dusk, but the renewed landscape and warmer temperatures lifted everyone's spirits. Matthew, now 4 months old, had grown into a robust, cheerful baby with his mother's auburn hair and a curious gaze that took in everything around him. Naomi gradually resumed her duties in the cookhouse, with Matthew nearby in the cradle or, more often, held by whoever was free and willing, which was just about everyone. She marveled at how this makeshift family had embraced them both, healing wounds she hadn't realized were still so raw. One particularly fine April afternoon, Quinn found Naomi hanging laundry behind the cookhouse, Matthew sleeping in a basket at her feet. The sight of her in the sunshine, hair escaping from her practical bun as she stretched to hang a sheet, made his heart skip a beat, as it often did these days. "Need some help?" he offered, approaching with a smile. Naomi turned, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "Quinn, I thought you were out with the herd today." "Finished early," he explained, taking a shirt from her basket and hanging it on the line. "Thought I might steal you and Matthew away for a picnic if Mrs. Abernathy can spare you." "A picnic?" Naomi repeated, clearly pleased by the idea. "I haven't been further than the hen house in weeks. Where did you have in mind?" "There's a spot by the creek about a mile out," Quinn said. "The wildflowers are blooming and it's sheltered from the wind, perfect for a little one's first outdoor adventure." Naomi glanced fondly at her sleeping son. "He'd like that. So would I." An hour later, they were settled on a blanket beside the burbling creek, just as Quinn had described. Matthew lay awake between them, kicking his legs excitedly at the dappled sunlight filtering through the cottonwood branches above. Naomi sighed contentedly, leaning back on her hands. "It's so beautiful here. I'd almost forgotten what the world looks like beyond the ranch yard." Quinn watched her, still struck by how natural she looked in this setting, as if she belonged to this land as much as the wildflowers and creek willows. "Are you happy, Naomi, at the Double Cross?" She considered the question seriously. "Yes," she finally said. "Happier than I ever expected to be after everything. The ranch feels like home now." Quinn nodded, gathering his courage for what he'd planned to say today. "I've been thinking a lot about home lately, about making one properly." Naomi looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "Harrison offered me a piece of land," Quinn explained. "North parcel near the creek bend. Said I've earned it after 5 years of service. There's good grazing, water rights, enough to start a small operation of my own while still working for him." "Quinn, that's wonderful," Naomi exclaimed. "You deserve it. You're the hardest working man on the ranch." Quinn smiled at her enthusiasm. Thing is, I don't want that land just for cattle. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that he kept closed in his palm for the moment. I want it for a home. A real home with a proper house and a garden, maybe even a few fruit trees someday. Understanding dawned in Naomi's eyes, her breath catching slightly. I know it's only been a few months, Quinn continued, his voice growing more certain with each word. And I promise to give you time. But I've known since Christmas, since before then, if I'm honest, that what I feel for you isn't going to change. He opened his hand, revealing a simple gold band. This was my mother's. I've carried it since she passed, waiting for the right time, the right person. Tears welled in Naomi's eyes as Quinn gently took her hand. I'm not just asking you, Naomi. I'm asking both of you. He glanced down at Matthew, who gazed up at him with wide, innocent eyes. I want to be a father to him in every way that matters. I want to build a life with you both. He took a deep breath. Naomi Dawson, will you marry me? Let me love you and Matthew for the rest of our days. Naomi's tears spilled over, but her smile was radiant. Yes, she whispered. Oh, Quinn, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, mindful of the baby between them. Their kiss was sweet and full of promise, not their first, but the most significant yet, sealing a future neither had imagined possible 6 months earlier. When they drew apart, Naomi looked down at Matthew, who had grasped a fold of Quinn's shirt in his tiny fist. Look at that, she said softly. He's already chosen you. Quinn gently freed his shirt only to offer his finger instead, which Matthew immediately grabbed. I chose him too, Quinn said, his voice thick with emotion. From the first moment I saw him, just like I chose his mother. Naomi leaned her head against Quinn's shoulder. When I left Enid that day, I thought I'd lost everything. I never imagined I was actually on my way to finding everything I needed. They sat together by the creek, a family not formed by blood but by choice and love and circumstance, making plans for a future that seemed brighter than any Naomi had dared to dream. The wedding took place on the first day of June, a perfect late spring Saturday when the ranch could spare most hands for the celebration. Harrison insisted the ceremony be held at the main house, with his wife organizing the decorations and festivities with enthusiasm that suggested she'd been waiting years to host such an event. Word of the marriage spread throughout the territory, reaching even Enid, where Reverend Dawson reportedly received the news with stony silence. Several of the townspeople who had come to regret their treatment of Naomi sent gifts and well wishes, though none quite dared to attend in person. Mrs. Abernathy outdid herself with the wedding feast, enlisting help from neighboring ranches to prepare enough food for the considerable guest list. The Harrisons invited not just their own workers but friends from miles around, turning the event into the social occasion of the season. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. Quinn stood beneath an arch of spring flowers, watching with undisguised adoration as Naomi walked toward him in a dress of cream-colored silk, a gift from Mrs. Harrison, who insisted a bride needed something special. In Naomi's arms, 6-month-old Matthew wore a miniature version of his soon-to-be father's suit, complete with a tiny bolo tie that Quinn had special ordered from Enid. The territorial judge who performed the ceremony included special words acknowledging Matthew's place in their new family, moving many guests to tears, including several tough cowboys who later claimed dust had gotten in their eyes. When Quinn and Naomi exchanged vows, their voices were clear and certain, carrying across the assembled guests with the weight of a promise long considered and deeply meant. As the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn gently took Matthew from Naomi's arms so she could receive her first kiss as Mrs. Norwood without crushing their son between them. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music and dancing under lantern light in the ranch yard. Quinn proved surprisingly adept on the dance floor, leading Naomi through waltz after waltz while various admirers took turns holding a sleepy Matthew. As night fell and stars appeared in the clear June sky, the newlyweds slipped away to the small cabin Quinn had been preparing on their new land. It was just a simple two-room structure for now, with plans for expansion over the coming years, but it was theirs, the beginning of the home they would build together. They put Matthew to bed in the cradle Quinn had carried over that morning, then stood together in the doorway of their new home, Quinn's arms wrapped around Naomi's waist as they looked out at their land. "Happy, Mrs. Norwood," Quinn murmured against her hair. Naomi turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the lines of his face in the moonlight. "Happier than I have words for," she admitted. "A year ago I couldn't have imagined this life. A year ago I was just another cowhand with no real future," Quinn replied. "Then I found you at that crossroads." "You saved us," Naomi said softly. Quinn shook his head. "We saved each other." Their life together settled into a rhythm as natural as the seasons. The small cabin gradually expanded as Quinn added rooms with help from the ranch hands, first a proper kitchen, then a bedroom for Matthew, and eventually a covered porch where they could sit in the evenings, watching their son chase fireflies in the yard. Quinn continued working for the Double Cross while slowly building up his own herd on their land. Naomi established a vegetable garden that became the envy of neighboring ranches, and her preserves won ribbons at the territorial fair 2 years running. Matthew grew from a baby to a toddler to a sturdy little boy with his mother's thoughtful nature and his father's quiet determination. In the spring of 1889, nearly 3.5 years after Quinn first brought Naomi to the Double Cross, their family expanded again with the birth of twin boys Joseph Thomas and William James Norwood. Matthew, now a serious and protective 4-year-old, took his role as big brother with solemn pride, helping his mother whenever he could and reporting daily to his father about the twins' latest accomplishments. The Oklahoma land run that same year brought dramatic changes to the territory. Enid transformed overnight from a small settlement into a booming town, as thousands of homesteaders staked their claims on newly opened lands. The Double Cross found itself with new neighbors on all sides, though Harrison's established property rights remained secure. With the influx of settlers came news that Reverend Dawson had left Enid, moving further east after his congregation dwindled in the wake of the controversy surrounding his treatment of Naomi. Some said he'd gone to Kansas, others to Missouri, but no one seemed certain, and the Norwoods made no effort to find out. One warm September evening in 1890, Naomi sat on the porch of their now comfortable home, watching Quinn teach 5-year-old Matthew how to throw a lasso while the year-old twins crawled nearby under the watchful eye of Mrs. Abernathy, who visited regularly despite her claims that 3 boys were too much excitement for a woman her age. "He's a natural," Mrs. Abernathy commented as Matthew successfully roped the practice post Quinn had set up. "Just like his father." Naomi smiled, knowing the older woman's use of father was deliberate and meaningful. Quinn had legally adopted Matthew 2 years earlier, though they had always been honest with the boy about his origins. As far as Matthew was concerned, Quinn was the only father he'd ever known or needed. "He is," Naomi agreed, watching the identical expressions of concentration on her husband's and son's faces. "They all are." "You've built something special here," Mrs. Abernathy said, deftly catching William before he could crawl off the edge of the porch. "Not many get second chances like you two found." "I think about that every day," Naomi admitted. How differently things might have turned out if Quinn hadn't stopped at that crossroads. Mrs. Abernathy snorted. That wasn't chance, child. That was providence. Before Naomi could respond, the sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention. Quinn straightened, hand instinctively moving to where he would normally wear his gun, though he'd removed it for the roping lesson. A fine carriage appeared around the bend in their drive, pulled by a matched pair of bays that spoke of money and Eastern tastes. The driver, a middle-aged man in formal attire, pulled to a stop in front of their house. Quinn moved protectively to stand between the carriage and his family as the passenger door opened. A woman emerged elegantly dressed, perhaps 60 years old, with silver-streaked dark hair and features that struck Naomi with a jolt of recognition. "Mother," she gasped, rising to her feet. Naomi Dawson stood uncertainly beside the carriage, her eyes taking in the scene before her, the comfortable homestead, the children, the obvious prosperity that defied the dire future Samuel had predicted for their disgraced daughter. "Naomi," she said, her voice catching. "I wasn't sure I'd find you." Quinn moved to Naomi's side, his arm slipping supportively around her waist. "Mrs. Dawson," he acknowledged with a cautious nod. "You must be Mr. Norwood," Alina replied, studying him with open curiosity. "I've heard." "Well, I've heard many things, not all of them true, I suspect." "Mother, what are you doing here?" Naomi asked, still stunned by this apparition from her past. "How did you find us?" Alina's composure wavered slightly. "Your father and I separated last year." "I've been living with my sister in Kansas City." She hesitated. "A merchant from Enid visited there on business. He mentioned a Naomi Norwood whose preserves had won prizes at the fair. He said she had been the minister's daughter once." Mrs. Abernathy had gathered all 3 children close, watching the exchange with protective vigilance. "It took some time to find the exact location," Alina continued. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me after everything, but I had to try." Her eyes moved to the children, lingering on Matthew, who bore such a strong resemblance to Naomi. "Are these my grandchildren?" Naomi felt Quinn's arm tighten around her, letting her know without words that this was her decision to make. She took a deep breath, 5 years of hurt and abandonment warring with the memory of the mother who had once loved her unconditionally. "Yes," she finally said. "This is Matthew, he's 5 now, and the twins Joseph and William, who just turned 1. Alina's eyes filled with tears. "They're beautiful, Naomi." An awkward silence fell, broken by Matthew, who stepped forward with the direct curiosity of childhood. "Are you my grandmother?" he asked. Alina looked to Naomi, clearly uncertain how to answer. "Yes, Matthew," Naomi said after a moment. "This is your grandmother Dawson, my mother." The simple acknowledgement seemed to release something in Alina. She knelt, heedless of her fine dress against the dusty yard. "Hello, Matthew. I'm very pleased to meet you." Matthew considered this, then asked the question no adult would have dared. "Where have you been?" "Grandma Abernathy has been here always." Alina's face flushed with shame. "I've been away for too long. I made a mistake by not coming sooner." "That's all right," Matthew said with the easy forgiveness of childhood. "Papa says everybody makes mistakes. It's fixing them that counts." Fresh tears spilled down Alina's cheeks. "Your papa sounds like a wise man." "He is," Matthew agreed proudly. "The wisest in all of Oklahoma Territory." Quinn cleared his throat, clearly moved by his son's assessment. "Mrs. Dawson, would you care to come inside?" It's nearly supper time. The invitation, simple as it was, represented far more than a meal. Alina understood this, rising slowly to her feet. "I would like that very much, Mr. Norwood, if Naomi agrees." All eyes turned to Naomi, who stood frozen between past and present, hurt and hope. Quinn's hand found hers, squeezing, gently supporting without influencing. "We have plenty," she finally said, "and I'd like you to see our home." That evening marked the beginning of a careful reconciliation. Naomi Dawson spent 2 weeks with the Norwoods, gradually earning her place in their family through genuine remorse and the obvious love she felt for her grandchildren. She spoke little of Samuel, except to say that his bitterness had eventually driven away not just his daughter but his congregation and finally his wife. When she departed, it was with promises to return for Christmas and regular letters in between. As Quinn and Naomi watched her carriage disappear down the road, Matthew between them holding each of their hands, Naomi felt the last piece of her past settle into place. "Are you all right?" Quinn asked gently. Naomi nodded, leaning against his strong shoulder. "I am. It's strange I spent so long being angry at them both, and now I just feel sorry for Father. He's lost everything that matters because he couldn't bend, couldn't forgive." "Some men are like that," Quinn said. "Too rigid to see that strength sometimes means admitting you're wrong." Matthew tugged at their hands. "Can we go back to the roping lesson now?" Quinn laughed, swinging their son up onto his shoulders. "Absolutely, Cowboy. Your form was looking mighty fine before we got interrupted." As they walked back toward the practice post, Naomi watched the man she had come to love with her whole heart, teaching their oldest son with endless patience. In the 5 years since Quinn had found her at that crossroads, they had built something precious together, not just a home or a family, but a legacy of love and second chances that would endure long after they were gone. That night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Quinn and Naomi sat on their porch watching the stars emerge above their land. His arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, they enjoyed a moment of peace in their busy lives. "I was thinking," Quinn said softly, "about that first day, when I said that baby deserved a safe home." Naomi looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "I remember. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to me." Quinn smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I had no idea then that I was really talking about all of us, you, Matthew, the twins, that we all deserved this home we've built together. And you," Naomi added, reaching up to touch his face, "you deserved it too, Quinn. After everything you lost with Rebecca, everything you sacrificed." "I haven't sacrificed a thing," he said firmly. "Everything I truly wanted I found with you." Naomi leaned up to kiss him, still marveling after all these years at how right it felt to be in his arms. "I love you, Quinn Norwood. More with each passing day." "And I love you, Naomi Norwood," he replied, his voice deep with emotion. "From that crossroads to forever." Above them, a shooting star streaked across the Oklahoma sky, not an ending, but a continuation of the story that had begun that autumn day in Enid, when a desperate young woman and a compassionate cowboy found each other at life's crossroads and chose together the path toward home.